Yeah, so if you're looking to scale your e-commerce business to international markets and want to do it at a fraction of the cost and time that it used to take to test those markets, I think this video could be interesting to check out.
Yeah, and so we overviewed and demoed a way to use three different AI tools together to test your best ad creatives in other languages while still making them feel as organic as possible. We're doing this because we're building ecom brands and we're diving into all the new AI tools that help us do more for less.
So earlier this year, we had a client that asked us if we could turn some of their better performing creatives into other languages to test in international markets. At the time, we basically took a video creative that was faceless but had a voice behind it. So, sort of a UGC style ad creative. But the person was off camera, slash, the voiceover was not directly synced to someone talking on camera, a talking head video. And basically at that time, what we did was we just ran the copy through ChatGPT. It came up with some copy that was, I think, good enough to run through and try. And we launched the ads in the respective countries, and the early data on it seemed to be pretty promising, which is nice to hear and nice to see. And I think for me, I think the comparison I always make is, back in history is like, if this was 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, like how much more effort it would take to test something internationally, right? I think it's really cool now that, like, within hours or a weekend, you can pretty quickly test something somewhere else in the world. And so since AI has been picking up steam this year, things have evolved quite a bit since the way that we did the testing. And, it's interesting to see what sort of solutions are out there right now. There's a lot of text to speech software that can or is trained on different languages and can also be trained on voices that you feed it to speak other languages. And so I think it'd be kind of cool. We thought it was kind of cool to look into that a little more to see what the utility currently of these solutions are and how far you can sort of push them, or to what degree they can be useful. So yeah, I think it'd be kind of cool. Alfred, you've taken a look at some of these solutions, you played around with them, and I think it'd be cool to see, having played with them and ran a little bit of media through it, what your opinion is of them and what we can sort of expect at this time when it comes to sort of our qualitative assessment of how good of a job these solutions do and how useful they can be in testing, regardless of whether or not they're perfect or some degree of good enough.
Yeah, I think my perspective of these text-to-speech tools have certainly shifted over the past few months, and I think a lot of it is because of one of the tools that we're going to be showing today, ElevenLabs. And so they're before kind of listening to them, we were using some other ones to do, various different. We were using some other text-to-speech tools, and I just never really got the feeling that it sounded like a human. But with ElevenLabs, with a lot of their, they have some pre-made voices that we were playing around with that you can use for free, and I was really surprised at how good they are. Now, I think they have some. When you know that you're using a text-to-speech tool, you're kind of like specifically looking for how it might not sound real. And so I think if you know it's not real, then you can pick it out. If you're just hearing something for the first time and you don't actually know, and we actually kind of tested this as well, like we show it to someone else, and they just had no idea that it was something that was created through a text-to-speech tool. And so I think when it comes to the utility of using it, deploying it in testing campaigns for whether it's in English or potentially in other languages, because I would assume that it would sound just as realistic in other languages. Not being fluent in those languages makes it difficult for us to assess that. But assuming it is, then yeah, I think there's a ton of utility in just being that sort of the first draft in how we would deploy something, because it just makes it takes a lot less effort to do it this way than having to find someone who speaks that language, or to record it ourselves, because we'll say a lot of ahs and ums, make mistakes, and have to potentially edit it down. And this here, you can type it up, get a nice clean voiceover on the first try, without any sort of extraneous noise.
Yeah. I think, one of the things that you had brought up very early on around this was the sort of ethical considerations around using tools like ElevenLabs. I think if, let's say, you do have content from, let's say, a customer, for example, and it's performing well as like true UGC in your ads, in your Facebook media buying, TikTok media buying, and just turning that into another language and running it on paid ads is something that I think you and I have thought about around, okay, what steps need to happen before you start running that media. Part of it is probably you want to talk to the person who you're actually doing this translation with, and making sure there's some clearance around it, that they're okay with it. And they're either okay with it, they want to be compensated for it, whatever the case is. But I think that's something that I know was really big to discuss, because now it's like, and I heard Taylor Holiday talking about this from CTC, about how there are companies out there with banks of like gigabytes and gigabytes of UGC content, and they're just basically able to create anyone's thing, anything now. And so there's so many like lines right now that I think need to be considered that didn't need to previously be considered. But for our case, I think we're just thinking about it more so from a possibility for businesses to have some sort of tactical executable ways of testing international markets in a much cheaper, timely way than they could previously, within the constraints of being ethical and making sure everybody's okay with what's being said, how it's being said, and how the beanie is being run. Yeah, did you have any additional thoughts beyond that as you went through, using the actual software, and maybe certain things arise that didn't previously around the, I guess, the more ethical considerations about using tools that have text to speech or translating one person's voice to another language?
I think it's still just along the same lines, right? We don't want to be misrepresenting something. So, what you said about making sure that we have permission from the person is probably the first thing, and that only applies if you're actually training a voice. Because let's say, for example, with ElevenLabs, they have a lot of pre-made voices where they are letting you to use that as part of their service. And so presumably these are voices that they've gone permission to allow other people to use, or maybe they are AI trained voices that maybe don't represent anyone, but just sort of a mixture of a lot of different people. And so there's a broader discussion on AI in general around, where did someone find their training data, and is it ethical to be able to use all this public, or maybe not so public, training data, scrape the internet, and then come up with, whether it's Mid Journey and images, or it's ElevenLabs and voices, or ChatGPT and text, like, where their data sets come from. I think there's a broader ethical question around that we probably won't get into. It's not really our domain. But as it pertains to us, like, let's assume that these pre-made voices are free to use. I think beyond that, the ethical question is like, is what you're saying true and accurate? And I think that that question is going to be true regardless if you're using an AI voice or you're just speaking it. And so I don't think that changes anything. And then, like you said, if we're using a trained voice, then we need to make sure that we are getting permission from the person, whether it's yourself or someone else, that we can train their voice, and helping them understand that if we are training their voice, that we're uploading these clips to ElevenLabs, and they will have their terms, and and we have to trust that they're not going to take those files and then use it for their own purposes as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I took a look earlier at some of the audio that came out from the demos that you did. I was surprised at how good some of it came out. I was shockingly surprised. One of the audios came from someone that we know, and to hear her speaking Spanish for the first time ever in a way that maybe doesn't sound fluent, like native to Spanish speakers, but articulating the vocabulary and the words was really interesting. And I could tell that it was her voice. I was really shocked at the effectiveness of it. What's been your take on, I guess, ElevenLabs and its utility in being able to help businesses with testing international markets?
Yeah, I think it allows us to gain a speaker of multiple different languages, and without having to, from the computer. It's text to speech, but it's someone who speaks a different language, and now we have sort of ChatGPT as a translator. So, I think it allows us to test these international markets in a way where we can, more than before, trust that the translations are going to be more accurate, right? So in the past, Google Translate, we know it kind of like gives you a rough idea of what's being said, but you just know that the grammar is going to be wrong or the words are going to be weird. And so you can kind of get the gist of it. But with ChatGPT, I think we've sort of crossed this barrier where, like, hey, you know what? This is probably going to sound just like someone who speaks Spanish, for example, would make it sound like. And then we can take that text now and put it into ElevenLabs and get a voice that sounds very much like a Spanish speaker. And so, I think there's a ton of utility there for non-native speakers of different languages to just test to see, hey, is this ad or is this product something that could be marketed in this other region? And if so, and it starts to show some good signs, and allows you to make decisions on how you proceed from there.
What was your take on, I guess, the quality of what came out?
I was surprised. Yeah. I think the first few times I had done it, I probably messed up the settings a little bit, right? Because it was enunciating the words like an English speaker, but we were trying to do something in Spanish. So it just sounded like a very obvious English accented Spanish. But then you just change the settings to say, like, hey, this is going to be actually a different language. And, I don't know Spanish, but I can tell that this sounds much more like native Spanish. And I could not pick out the English accent, even though I'm sure a Spanish speaker would be able to tell that maybe something's off, if there is anything off.
Yeah, that's cool. And I think what this introduces as well is the ability to be scrappy with things in a way, in that, you can take your best performing creatives, as long as whoever's in those videos is okay with it. You test it in another language, you get proof of concept that, hey, I am getting some conversions in this country. Then you can start doing things more robustly. Like maybe you get UGC from there because you're getting customers from there now, and then you actually get native speakers from that market to start using in your ads and so forth. So I think it's a really interesting thing that opens up the ability to try things that you could never try before at the budget or the speed that it would require in the past. Like in the past, if you wanted to do the same ads but have it done in another language, you might have to actually like find people or find customers who are willing to, share a very similar story, have a very similar experience. It would be almost impossible to replicate 100%. And I'm thinking about in the case of like consumables, for example. So if like one of your customers has one result that fix one problem for them, it might be hard to find someone who has the exact same story as that. Whereas if you have them just speaking it in their language, it's still a true story based on them. It's just now been translated into another language. And so you still have that very clean, at least for me, the clean ethical sort of consideration around that it's still a true story of what's being said, just in a different language. Whereas in the past, it'd be harder to do that. You'd have to sort of just dub it over, potentially. So I think it's really exciting that you can test things in a really scrappy way, be quick with it, get proof of concept, and double down with hopefully some margin that you've already earned to then make it even more robust.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to put it. Is allows you to be more scrappy. And I think that's what AI sort of allows us to do in general. It's allowing us to do more with less resources, right? It's like everything just becomes a little bit easier to do. So it's more like, what can you think of, and what can you it's like what can you think of, and what is it that you want to do? Because now the barrier to getting it done is so much lower.
Were there any surprising things that came up while you were testing it out, either positive or negative?
I think just the most surprising thing was how far the technology has come, and how good these voices sound. And I guess having previously not worked with these text-to-speech tools too much, it was probably sort of the same type of feeling that I got when I started working with ChatGPT for the very first time, right? It's just like you're just a little bit surprised by how real this seems, like how much they understand, how much ChatGPT understands what it is that you're trying to say. And similarly with ElevenLabs, I was surprised by how realistic these voices can sound.
Yeah, that's cool. I don't watch a whole bunch of Mr. Beast, but to my knowledge, they've been translating a lot of his videos or his team's videos, him and his team's videos, into other languages, and they have like full-blown professional actors doing it. And now I could imagine them not really needing it anymore if they choose, which is really interesting. Whereas,
yeah, I actually see that a little bit differently.
Investing a lot of money into it as well.
Yeah, I see that a little bit differently, because what I noticed from doing these voiceovers is that while it sounds very realistic, there's a limitation to the emotion that you might get from their voices. And so they'll read something, it'll sound like a real human being, but like, let's say with Mr. Beast, I think it's really important for him to emote in a certain way, right? Like how he opens up his videos, it's very dramatic. He kind of, is like, these 10 people are going to be doing this amazing thing, right? And
yeah, it's high energy.
Yeah, high energy. And so that, I think, is you're not going to be able to replicate that quite as much in at least in ElevenLabs, and I'm sure eventually it's going to get there. But so far, I haven't seen it being able to provide the intonations and where you want to emphasize things. It's like you don't have that same control as you might have if you were just using a real human.
Cool. Anything else you want to mention about what you noticed or observed while testing this out before jumping into the demo?
No, I don't think so.
Cool. Let's take a look then.
All right, let's take a look. Let's go through a couple of examples so we can see what's possible. The first creative we have is one we made for one of our clients. This creative has a voiceover, but the speaker is off camera. This is a more ideal scenario because we don't have to worry about matching someone's mouth movements to the voice. Let's take a look.
This cleanser is better than a boyfriend. First of all, it's reliable. I know exactly where it's been because all ingredients are ethically sourced and traceable. Secondly, it's refreshing. I walk away always feeling balanced because the goji berry, ginseng, and dandelion help my pH levels.
Okay, so we don't need to go through the whole thing, but you get the idea. There's some action happening on screen, plus a voiceover of someone speaking off camera. So to get started, we take our English script and we translate it to get a script in a different language, in this case, Spanish. And now that we have the Spanish script, we need to create a voiceover in Spanish. To do that, we use ElevenLabs. ElevenLabs is one of the leaders in text-to-speech, and their voices are the most realistic that we've come across so far. With ElevenLabs, you can create a voiceover with one of their pre-made voices, but what's really cool is that you can train your own voice too. This requires you to be on one of their paid plans to have the ability to create these custom voices, but you can get started for $5 with their starter plan. And so if you wanted to train your own voice, you can go to the Voice Labs area, add generative or clone voice, instant voice cloning, and you'll get this menu here. So we can give it a name, so call it test voice, and then you just need to add samples of someone speaking to let their system train on it. And so these files should be free of any background music and just be very crisp and clean so that it doesn't mess up the algorithm as much. And so we can add some files here and just make sure that you have the rights to use them. And then you can add the voice and it will train the voice. So that's that new voice here. Essentially, it's one that we already created. We call it Nina. And so if we want to use this Nina voice, we can hit use and we can see that the settings here have shown that it's now using the Nina voice. So with the voice settings, you can just leave it as default. And then with the model, you have the option to use monolingual or multilingual. So you're going to want to use multilingual if you're going to be creating voiceovers in other languages. So for example, in Spanish, there's that Spanish there. Otherwise, it's going to sound like accented Spanish if you use the monolingual. So we can take a quick look at what that looks like. So if we were to take maybe the first couple lines of the script and paste it here and generate.
Este limpiador es mejor que un novio. En primer lugar, es confiable. Sé exactamente dónde ha estado porque todos sus ingredientes son éticamente obtenidos y trazables.
And as you can see, that sounds like really accented Spanish. Now, if we take that same script, use the multilingual model, then it will sound like this.
Este limpiador es mejor que un novio. En primer lugar, es confiable. Sé exactamente dónde ha estado, porque todos sus ingredientes son éticamente obtenidos y trazables.
And that sounds way better. I'm not a Spanish speaker, but I can tell that the way the intonations are just sounds a lot more authentic. Obviously, a native Spanish speaker would be able to really tell how that might sound compared to a real person, but from my untrained ears, that sounds way better. If you just want to use the free version, you can still use any of these pre-made voices. So for example, we can take the pre-made Rachel and generate the same thing.
Este limpiador es mejor que un novio. En primer lugar es confiable. Sé exactamente dónde ha estado, porque todos sus ingredientes son éticamente obtenidos y trazables.
And if you're just testing out creating voiceovers in different languages and you don't need to have a specific voice, any of these pre-made voices will work just fine. And now that you have the voiceovers, you can just take the existing video files and add the voiceover and edit it like you normally would with an English voiceover. And you have a piece of UGC that's in a different language. And here's what that could look like.
Este limpiador es mejor que un novio. En primer lugar, es confiable. Sé exactamente dónde ha estado, porque todos sus ingredientes son éticamente obtenidos y trazables. En segundo lugar, es refrescante. Siempre me voy sintiendo equilibrada porque la baya de goji, el diente de león y el ginseng ayudan.
We'll stop it there. But as you can see, we have a UGC ad translated from our original ad that's now ready for testing in Spanish markets. So here's a second example where we have another creative, but in this case, it's a talking head where the speaker is speaking directly to the camera. This is a more difficult situation to translate. And normally, if we wanted to do creatives in different languages, we would find a creator who knows that language. And so let's take a quick look.
And this is one of the biggest design flaws of the 20th century. There's something in every facial cleanser that no one ever talks about, but everyone should. And that something is water.
Okay, so as you can see, the creator is speaking directly to the camera, their mouth is moving, and if we wanted to use the exact same footage, but have them speaking in Spanish, dubbing it wouldn't necessarily be the easiest thing to do. However, there's this tool called Wave to Lip, and it's a free AI tool that was originally released 3 years ago, well before this recent AI boom. It's hosted on GitHub, a place where coders can share their code. Considering we're not coders, it's not the easiest to use, but there's actually this Google Colab where you can just run it from your browser without needing any coding knowledge. So let's take a look at what that looks like. You just need to follow the steps here and you're done. So let's start with step 1, where we get things set up. I'm going to speed through this part so you don't have to wait too long. And while that's getting set up, I'm going to upload a couple of files that's going to be used a little bit later. Okay, so step 1's complete. Step 2 is to upload your video and audio footage. There's an option to use YouTube video, but we're not going to do that. We're going to actually use audio and video files that we have. So we uploaded these 2 files while step 1 was running. We have a video file, which is the video portion of the talking head UGC ad we were watching earlier. And we have an audio file, which followed the same process we used in our first example, where we translated the voiceover script using ChatGPT and used ElevenLabs to generate a Spanish voiceover trained on the creator's voice. First, let's add the video file. And then we're going to copy the path of the audio file, add that here, change this to custom path, and we're going to process those. Note that one of the limitations here is that it can only handle 720p, so the video output isn't going to be the highest quality. Let's add the audio file now. Okay, so we can listen to what that looks like.
El agua constituye aproximadamente el 80% de los limpiadores faciales.
And then finally, once you have the video and audio files uploaded, you can run step 4, and it will combine the 2 together to create that lip sync video. And so while this is running, I just wanted to talk about a few things that I found while working through this. First is that it does take a little bit of trial and error to get this to work. It's not bulletproof. It's not the most robust. And a lot of the times I found that it ended up failing on me. And so there's a couple of things that helped it work more consistently. And so first, you're going to want the audio file and the video file to be similar in length. And secondly, for the video file, you're going to want the entire clip to have an unobstructed view of the face and the lips moving. If the person looks away for a moment, or if maybe they put their hand to cover their face, or just there's a different scene that cuts away, that kind of messes up the algorithm and doesn't know what to do with it. And I found that more often than not, it would fail when trying to create the video. So it's not perfect, but if you are able to clip your videos to just get the portions where the person's speaking, it can work quite well at times. So let's just zoom ahead until this is finished processing. Okay, so now that it's finished running, we have the raw file with the lip sync video, and we've edited it into a UGC video. So let's take a look.
El agua constituye aproximadamente el 80% de los limpiadores faciales. Y este es uno de los mayores fallos de diseño del siglo XX, que comenzó alrededor de los años 90.
Since we're looking to create a talking head video in another language, we're really focusing in on how realistic the lip syncing is. And it's not great. You can tell that the mouth is at times moving in time with the Spanish, but I would think anyone watching this would be able to tell it just doesn't look right. This may be because the wave-to-lip technology is 3 years old, and AI tools have developed so much since then. We have no doubt we'll be seeing plenty of tools that improve on this in the coming months or years. For now, Flawless.ai might be the best option available. It's the best we could find. But they seem targeted towards major production studios. We reached out to them for a quote and haven't heard back, but they probably would be too expensive for the majority of e-commerce stores. But they have some really realistic lip sync technology. Check out their demo.
Now we're stuck on this stupid tower in the middle of nowhere. 軽蔑してるよね。仕方ないよ。Y es todo por mi culpa.
Pretty cool. And this is something that will eventually come to the masses, but we're not quite there yet.
Thanks for watching to the end of this video. Please like and subscribe to help us out.
If you want help with implementing AI tools into your business, leave a comment with "the prompted" below and we'll reach out.